You can't talk about art history without seeing the impact Catholicism has had on art, and the impact that art has had on Catholicism. It's time for our monthly art history lesson with Charles and Amanda Shepard from the Fort Wayne Museum of Art.
This is Kyle Hyman here at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art to get my monthly art history lesson from Charles and Amanda Shepard. Thank you for accommodating me.
Sure.
And stooping down to my level of art competency.
It's the least I could do, Kyle.
If there was anything
feel sorry
less,
for you, but I'll do it. Well, today we're talking about a really interesting time in art history, and it spans the Anglo-Catholic divide. So we're talking about a group of artists that kind of hovered around Catholic art, but I don't think we'd explicitly call it Catholic art, although the subjects are very Catholic, and we'll get to that. So we're talking about Sir John Everett Millais, who lived from 1829 to 1896, and he was one of the founders of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And this was a small group of artists, about 7, who wanted to return to what they thought was a more natural and realistic style before Raphael, who was an Italian painter who lived from 1483 to 1520. They felt that Raphael and his students and contemporaries corrupted art by generalizing realism, by omitting certain details that made subjects look real and kind of gritty, and thus elevated the human figure to kind of a generic, statuesque, overly idealized, and therefore unrelatable form. So, for example, sitters might be wearing Greco-Roman robes to make them look more
regal and noble.
Yeah, noble and important, wearing jewels that they normally wouldn't wear, or their skin might be the texture omitted and the color overly unified. So the Pre-Raphaelites rejected all that and really were in favor of nature. They were influenced by John Ruskin, who extensive writings on this return back to basics. That doesn't mean they sacrificed skill or style. Very skilled group of painters.
Is this where we get into the landscapes and stuff that they were? I feel like you've talked in the past of like this, when they went from, was it landscapes to religious or religious to landscapes?
Well, religious to landscapes, because they thought the landscape is created by God, and the beauty of God would shine without using people.
Okay.
Or sometimes they would reference people indirectly by a beautiful landscape, lush and overgrown, and a humble little cottage in which the human lived, kind of thing.
So is that this era, or is this something different?
It's a cousin here.
Okay.
But this part first with the Pre-Raphaelites is going to involve more people and involve them in the way that you're describing, which would be more real, actually.
Yeah, depictions of real people living real lives. And
everyday kind of occurrences.
Yeah, and
instead
I think
of posed for a photograph in a unnatural spot.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And yet every day as a holy moment, so to speak.
Sure.
Yeah. So Millais' most controversial painting was Christ in the house of his parents, painted around 1850, and it was so reviled by English elites. Charles Dickens said things about it that I don't feel comfortable repeating for our listeners because, very critical of how the Holy Family is depicted. And I'll describe it for you. It shows a Christ child about 8 or 9 years old. He's working with his family in the family's carpentry workshop. We have Christ who has cut his finger on a nail, and he's barefoot. He's red-haired. He's surrounded by wood shavings, kind of the controlled disorder of a wood workshop. His mother, Mary, kneels next to him, offering her cheek for a kiss. John the Baptist is to the right, carrying a bowl of water, which prefigures his role as the Baptist. And we know this is John because of what he's wearing. His iconography is fur. He's also about the same age as Christ, which makes sense biblically. Joseph examines the wound. And then Anne, his grandmother, in the background it looks as though she's removed the nail with a tool or pair of pliers. So this was criticized because it shows the Holy Family not in their idealized, highly posed, clean environment. They were in a real life carpenter's workshop. It is filled with Catholic symbolism. So to the left, we see a basket of reeds, which prefigures Christ being hit, slapped with reeds for his passion.
The basket almost could be like a crown of thorns.
Yeah, it's just filled. Yes. Behind Christ, there's a primitive wooden ladder with a white dove, symbolizing the Holy Spirit. Behind John the Baptist, we have wooden boards, which symbolize the cross. Behind Anne, out in the pasture, we have sheep, the flock, wanting to get in.
Right.
Christ is shown in almost the dead center of the painting, with all figures turning toward him, which symbolizes Christ as the center of everything. And also behind him, hanging next to the dove on the ladder, is a triangle, which symbolizes the Trinity.
Sure.
So this rich, detailed, natural symbolism really was controversial because it was the gritty truth which connects the painting to the gritty truth of the church, of the true church, not the post-Reformation Anglican church. And it wasn't explicitly a Catholic painting. I didn't find anywhere that Millais identified explicitly as a Roman Catholic, but the Pre-Raphaelites wanting to return to a time before the corruption, the supposed corruption of Raphael. I wouldn't necessarily say that Raphael corrupted things, but they thought that he had corrupted art. Follows closely with the thinkers of the Oxford movement, especially John Henry Newman, who wanted to return to the pre-Anglican days of the church and be more Catholic. And so the two groups were loosely correlated with one another, which is why this painting was so criticized, because, members of the high Anglican church did not want to be Catholic. And so this art, which is so realist and so rich with Catholic symbolism, was really not well liked. Queen Victoria, because of the controversy of the painting, she arranged for a private viewing just so she could see what it was all about. But I think it's a wonderful painting, even depicting Christ as a red-headed boy. What Charles Dickens had to say about this depiction of Christ is, it's borderline sacrilegious, so I can't even say it. But if you're curious, look it up. It is really, really nasty, which is ironic because Dickens is known as a realist in his writing. But apparently this was just too much for the Anglican establishment.
It almost reminds me of like a Norman Rockwell kind of a thing.
Oh, you're so right.
More, I don't know, messy.
Yes, yes. I mean,
there's like shavings all over the floor. And
it's funny that you say that because it's a messy environment, but it's a very tightly controlled, well-executed painting. I mean, it's a brilliant painting.
Yeah.
It's the draftsmanship, the color choices, the details, very competent painting. What I read is that even though this is meant to be a realist depiction of a real family, it's heavy with symbolism. So it's not a literal depiction of, who knows if John the Baptist ever actually was in that place and time with Jesus.
He certainly wasn't wearing a camel.
Right. No. Or that he would, have a bowl of water with him because later he would become the Baptist.
Right.
Or, there was a dove there at the time because the Holy Spirit was coming. No, these are all tools of the artist to tell a story in one particular place and time.
Yeah. That's very cool. Yeah. People definitely need to check this out.
You really need to see this painting.
I feel like this is something I want hanging up in my house.
I think you can buy prints of it. Yeah. I was thinking about it myself.
It's a beautiful painting. And as you say, that each detail reinforces the story. It's been very calculated in its placement and very calculated in its coloration. It is warm and fuzzy like a Rockwell.
Yeah.
in a sense.
But there's also the sadness of his crucifixion that we all know happened.
Yeah.
It's a warm and lovely environment, but everything points to his crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we run out of time, I have to move to the next painting,
Yeah.
also by Millais, painted in 1881 of Cardinal John Henry Newman. And
Now a saint.
yes, this was painted when Newman was about 80 years old in 1881. And the realism in this portrait is telling also. You look at his hands, you see the blue veins of his aged, thin skin. He's not standing tall and mighty and, as the intellectual giant that he was. He's older and looks a little tired.
Yeah.
His eyes are heavy. There's nothing behind him, no flashy Greco-Roman columns. He's in his full cardinal robes. He's painting it just as he is sitting here, which would have been a hallmark of the Pre-Raphaelites, to paint things as they are. Blue veins and mottled skin and thinning hair and all.
Right.
Now, I don't know the history of why this painting was commissioned, but again, the connection between this particular artist and this great Catholic figure who converted from the Anglican Church, that Catholic connection is really interesting to me.
Yeah. So this is the same artist.
Same artist.
Did both of these. And I think with my untrained eye, see some similarities, but also kind of a different approach.
It's a very different approach. I mean, the Christ in the house of his parents it's based on real events, but it's a fictional scene. And then the portrait of John Henry Newman is not fictional in almost any conceivable way.
So practically speaking here, obviously he doesn't have the Holy Family to pose for him. So is he getting models to pose in these positions and he paints them? And then what about with John Henry Newman?
He would have sat for him.
A model?
No. He would have actually used Newman.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. He would have sat for the artist.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, and the difference that points out, too, is that when Newman's sitting for him, he approaches Newman's age as shown through his facial features and his hands, quite directly and honestly. In the posed painting of the home of Jesus and his parents, everybody has a slightly less specifically real appearance. A little bit. Everybody's skin is fair and perfect.
They look like characters in a story. Even though,
like an illustration.
Right. Yeah.
And Millais was an illustrator. And I also want to add to, which is a very Catholic theme, is that Mary and Jesus are united. They're the only two figures that are closely embracing.
Because she's on her knees.
She's on her knees.
On his level.
Yes. And
he's showing the stigmata on his palm.
Yeah.
And in a sense, she's worshiping him and yet comforting him, being his mother.
Right.
And this is their eternal relationship. And everybody else in the painting is looking to that relationship. They're looking at Christ, but in looking at Christ, they're looking at Mary, and she's looking at him. It's such a rich, fascinating painting.
Very cool. Again, check him out. I'll put links to these images in the description so you can find that, kylehyman.com. And before we go, though, the Ellie Tullis show is still happening?
Sure. Yep. The Ellie Tullis Contemporary Visions of Mary exhibition is up through March 8th. And then in February, we open the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, which is the best teen art and writing from all of northern Indiana and some parts of Ohio, about 700 works of art and writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, check out the museum. Just stop by, say hello, go to the website, fwmoa.org.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Charles and Amanda Shepard.
Thank you.
Thank you.